This video is sponsored by MPB. What's remarkable about Epping Forest is that there's not only over 55,000 ancient veteran trees, it's that this forest is bordering Britain's most densely populated area, London. The forest preservation and really the sheer amount of remarkable old trees is due to its relationship with people. Whether it's through age-old ways that we've worked with trees, or passionate protest during times of threat, or even the strict royal laws imposed by kings of old, these ancient trees are remarkable, rare, and some of the oldest living organisms throughout Europe. And at 55,000 ancient and veteran trees, Epping has more than any other single site throughout Europe too. And what do we mean when we're describing a tree as either an ancient or a veteran? Well, in the case of an ancient tree, we are considering its age within the context of a species. For example, this absolute beast behind me here is a beech, and you can consider a beech to be ancient from the age of about 450. And behind me here is a hornbeam. This can be considered ancient from around 250 years. And a species like a silver birch can be considered ancient from around 150 years. But what about a veteran tree? Well, when we're describing a tree as a veteran, we are referring to its characteristics, its features. Veteran trees will often have really wide, girthy stem. They'll often have a lot of dead wood present in the crown. You'll often find a lot of decay, so like hollows in the main stem, and that will be largely from these guys. You'll find these on veteran trees. This is a Ganoderma species, but any other wood decaying fungus, if you find that growing on a tree, it's most likely going to be a veteran. And very often these characteristics are associated with ancient trees, so it's pretty safe to say that most ancient trees will be veterans, but not all veterans will be ancient. Look at this tree. When it comes to capturing the beauty of these old trees and really all of the beauty of the natural world, all that comes between me and you and this little window that we have here is camera equipment. And when I make these videos, I want to make sure that I have the best equipment possible so that you have the best picture. This is why I reached out to MPB to kit leave Curious out with new camera gear. Now, I say new camera gear, but it's not new. The awesome thing about MPB is that they deal in used camera gear. So whether if you're buying or selling, it's all used. And this for me is really important because I feel like we live in a world right now where everything has to be brought new. There seems to be such an excess of stuff being made, there's so much consumption and a real throwaway culture. So when it comes to getting new camera gear, it's really important for me that I'm able to get it secondhand. Plus, it's always just as good as getting new stuff. It's just a little bit cheaper as well, and that's great. They sent through a Sony FX30 and an array of different lenses, so I'm kitted out to make sure that I can capture everything in beautiful detail. This really is a great YouTube camera, and one I would recommend getting if you want to get into making videos like this. You know, I don't do anything special here. I'm just passionate about nature and YouTube, and I go out and make films. And maybe you're into photography and taking stills. Maybe you've got some old camera gear which you want to sell to MPB and make a little bit of money to put towards a new camera. Go to MPB, check it out. I'll link it in the description of the video, and I'll also link it in the comments as well. Go and see what they can offer you. For the people who made Epping Forest their home, they would have come here to gather resources and graze their animals, and it soon became known as common land. This is where those people would have had rights to come and harvest wood and graze their animals. The two main ways of harvesting wood is done through pollarding and done through coppicing. Pollarding is off the ground at a height of about 1.5 meters to 3 meters, whereas with coppicing, this is where the cuts are made at the ground level. Here we have an old beech coppice. And while this one is pretty cool, I'm actually en route to go and find one which I saw in a photograph online. Which way is it now? It's very easy to get lost here in Epping Forest, but you know, could pick worse places to get lost. So this beech is an example of an old coppice stall. So many moons ago, this would have been cut down to ground level and it's just grown up. This management prolongs the life of a tree, because if you think about it, the tree grows up, it gets cut, and then it grows back, and then it gets cut, and this can go on and on and on and on. And that's the reason why you have so many old ancient trees throughout Epping. Actually, that's one of the reasons why. And these traditional forms of management that have seen these trees reach these incredible ages, it has long since stopped. You often find pollards like this completely overgrown and growing upwards, and this has presented some interesting challenges and opportunities when managing these old pollards. But before we get into that, let's look over the past 1,000 years here in Epping, because there's been some pretty significant moments. Around the time of the 12th century, after the Norman conquest, Epping Forest was designated a royal forest, otherwise known as the Kingswood. These designations were put in place to protect the venison and the vert, meaning the animals and the trees. Within these areas, it was only the king and his noblemen who could hunt, and these royal forests were established throughout England, but predominantly in the south and in the county of Essex. And while these royal designations no doubt set in place the early preservation of forests like Epping, they were also pretty restrictive to the people living there, so they kind of lost much of their common rights. And right through the centuries, the kings and the queens and the noblemen, they would come to Epping to hunt. I'm actually in a spot, there's actually the Queen Elizabeth Hunting Lodge is actually a stone's throw just over that way. And it's now open to the public, free of charge, and it's something of a museum. I think I'd look good in that. And then later in the 17th and 18th century, a lot of the forest's old oaks were chopped down. I feel like I just haven't seen that many of them. This is an old oak pollard. There really isn't that many, and I think that's because the vast majority of the big ones few centuries ago were chopped down to build boats. But it was during the early 19th century that the forest saw some of its most significant moments which could have led to its enclosure, its segregation, and ultimately its destruction. Around this time, the nearby Hainault forest was pretty much completely wiped out. About 90% of it was lost and converted to low quality agricultural land, and this made the people of London, it made the local people really worried, and they feared that the same would happen to Epping. So this was a time of great tension, conflict. There was a lot of change happening. There was a road built straight through the heart of the forest. I actually think it's this one over here, which you might be able to hear. It was also during this time that there was a bit of tension arising between land which was privatised in the forest and then commoners who still had rights to go and lop the wood there. There was tension building there, and also I think it was something like 30,000 Londoners came to protest fences going into the forest. And at the time, this was a huge amount of people to rally together to fight for the forest. This was really quite significant. And this brought a lot of attention to the forest and its preservation and how the people felt about it. And ultimately, in 1887, the forest was purchased by the City of London Corporation, and it was designated a place for the public. And you know, all of the royal rights were stopped, all of the commoners' rights were stopped. I think grazing continued a little bit, but the forest was declared a place for the people. And really, that's the way Epping has stayed for the best part of the last 150 years. It's been a place for Londoners to come and stretch out their legs and experience nature when, you know, you just otherwise cannot get this vibe in a city. And the wood pastures which remain, these huge old big trees which remain, they give us a bit of a glimpse back into how people would have worked with the landscape. But they're also now tremendously ecologically valuable. You might have to get your eye in here, but is it just me, or does that look like somebody's bottom? You know, these old trees, when I look at them, I consider them to be pillars of life in their own right. They are a standing, living ecosystem. But to think that there's tens of thousands of them here spread out across Epping, that's really special. And I would like to speak to the people doing it, but from what I understand, the management of the forest today is all about preserving what we have and what's been created by these pollards being lapsed, but it's also a little bit about improving the conditions, because you see, when these pollards do become lapsed, they create a lot of shade. There's a lot of growth up there, and this completely shades out the forest floor. Like what we're seeing now really isn't an uncommon sight. The understory of Epping Forest is in large parts non-existent. So by opening up the old pollards and cutting some down, this will allow some light to pass through. You know, many of these old pollards, they haven't been cut for centuries, so the management, from what I understand, has been very sensitive. You know, it's been a bit experimental really, because you know, these trees, they haven't been cut for an awful long time, so you don't want to shock them and cut them back to where they used to be. That could be a little bit too much for them. This is the one sad thing about beech trees, is they do get scribbled on. If you've got this far in the video, then please do subscribe to Leave Curious. We cover stories of nature restoration. Very soon we are going to be going into Europe to keep doing what we're doing, and yeah, just making stories on exploring wild natural places and how we're trying to bring them back. I've got a members area over on Patreon where I do like an exclusive vlog. You can follow along, you can support, and you can also influence the story. This is going to come into full effect once we get on the road and get going. And a huge thank you to MPB for partnering up with Leave Curious and getting us kitted out. Let me know if you've liked the way this video has looked. I'm sure I will by the time I come to edit it. Go and check them out, see what deals they can offer you. If you want to keep watching the channel, there'll be a video on the screen now. But in the meantime, thanks for watching. Leave Curious.